My name is Bobbie Playforth. I'm the Senior Director of HR at CAP. My sister was an employee. Back in 1984, I was a sophomore in college, and I would come home from college in the summers and try to find summer employment, and I would just have trouble doing that because of my hands. And so my third summer of college, which was 1985, she said, "Why don't you come work at CAP in the summer, because we help out, not work, but come as a volunteer, because we always need volunteers, community volunteers." I'm like, I might as well do that, because the 2 summers before I wasn't successful finding a job, so that's what I did. So I volunteered that summer. At that time it was Caprice Industries, and I think the name, we later changed the name to just Caprice, but it was a workshop for adults with disabilities. I really didn't decide that I wanted to work with them. I made the decision that year not to go back to college. I kind of ended up falling in love with the boy next door. We decided to get married, and I didn't go back to college, and so I just needed a job. And by then I knew that program, I knew how it worked, and so my plan was to continue college, because I needed to get my last year of college and just be with Caprice for some period of time until I did that. I really didn't intend to stay 37 years. But somewhere along the way I fell in love with CAP, and I can't even exactly tell you when that happened, but somewhere along the way I knew I was going to stay at CAP as long as CAP would have me. The way that CAP interacts with people is so real and genuine, and it's just, where you are is where we're going to be okay with you being. We're going to love you wherever you are in this moment. And there was just times in my life that I really needed that for myself, and I loved that I had that opportunity to interact that way with somebody else. It was a day program for adults with disabilities, but we also had a really interesting food component where we had a full commercial kitchen, and our participants prepared meals that then we had delivery drivers who went and delivered to businesses in Pulaski County. And so businesses would order from us, a week in advance. Their meals, employees would order what they wanted, and we created menus and prepped those meals and sent those out to the community. And it was a really interesting, because then in the 80s, lots of agencies had day programs for people with disabilities, and they were trying to find valuable activities, meaningful things for them to do. This food service program that CAP created at Caprice was really unique, and the community loved it and valued it. And so some of the things that I did were with participants who also were in that food service component, but also we did other activities. We had instructors that came in. We had sign language classes. We had music classes. We had, different kinds of classes all day long, and I kind of coordinated those and created the schedule of events that we were doing. When I was in college, or actually even before I went to college, as I was telling my family that I was going to go to college, again, because of my hands, everyone that I would say, I'm going to be a teacher, that's what I thought I was going to do with my life, I'm going to be a teacher, they would say, "Oh, you're going to teach handicapped children." I would say, "No, I'm not going to teach handicapped children." I didn't have any desire to teach handicapped children, And the more people said that to me, the more determined I became that I was not going to teach handicapped children, And so then I end up in this program that's serving adults with disabilities, and I'm like, okay, now Lord, what is this about? Because this was not what I wanted to do. But it was interesting to get to see an organization do that really well. I felt like CAP did it really well, in that we served people with disabilities in a really affirming way, and we presented their abilities to the community. Later in that same program, so probably towards the end of my 10 years, we created a Job Start program where, again, we assisted those individuals that were participating in that program with finding meaningful work outside of the program. So we went and talked with employers, and if they were willing to hire one of our participants, then we had a job coach that went on the job with it. And that program was, federally funded at the time. So lots of agencies were doing that. Lots of organizations did that program. But the problem with them was when the funding was gone, they quit doing it. And CAP didn't do that. We continued that program for many years. And so it gave people who would never have had the opportunity to work in the community in a and have a career. It gave them that bridge from a day program type setting to a job in the community with that job coach. And that was really cool to see too. I wasn't the manager of the program at the time. I was coming up in the program as a coordinator. And so back then, Father Bobbie would make trips around the organization to visit different programs. And, we just didn't have we didn't have the technology. We didn't have the communication options that we have now, So if we wanted to hear from Father Bobbie, he had to come in person. And so that happened, I think, once a year. The year that he came, that he toured our food service kitchen, we had only, I don't remember, that program hadn't been running very long. I don't remember exactly how long, but anyway, we were so excited to show it to him. And someone captured a picture of me standing in that kitchen talking to Father Bobbie, and I was talking to him about it, and I got excited, and whatever I was talking about, I ended up putting my hand out, and I have this picture of me with my hand on his chest. It looks like I'm blessing Father Bobbie, but someone captured that picture, and I'm like, of course I did that. But there was I think I got to go to one manager's meeting as a manager before Father Bobbie was gone, and it was around Christmas, and he was talking about Mary. And we ended up doing a recording of that, and all the employees got a recording of it. But I remember sitting there listening to him talk and thinking, it's no wonder that when Father Bobbie says something, people want to do it, because when you listen to him talk, you believe that he's got the ear of God, and God's got his ear. They have a direct line to one another, and you're just mesmerized listening to him talk. So it was my one and only manager meeting I got to go to and hear him, but it was impactful. When my time is done, I want to feel like I am leaving CAP better than I found it, and that I've contributed the best that I can contribute, because I love CAP. And I feel like the people who came before me did that. They all had a heart to really do the best that they could and leave CAP in the best place that they could. And I'm one of the people that got handed that torch to, and I want to carry that torch well. So that's really important to me, and that weighs on my mind a lot. In some ways, it's interesting. The needs of people seem to have changed very little. That CAP focuses on the basics. The world can be crazy with a lot of things, but we're focusing on sharing Christ's love to people and giving people hope. Whatever that looks like. What does the need for hope look like in 2024, versus 1987? It's different. The hopelessness that people feel now, they're different. They're out different things. But what we do is still the same. We're still about helping people have hope and be a reflection of Christ's love. I would say that God loves CAP, and God is in the footprint of CAP, and God has a vision and a future for CAP, and whether Father Bobbie's here or gone, whether Bobbie Playforth is here or gone, it doesn't matter, because God is in the story of CAP, and the fact that each one of us get to have a little bit of time on that journey, I feel like as long as we keep that mission of sharing Christ's love and living out the gospel, if we lead with that and we let God do the rest, I don't know what the future of CAP holds, but it's going to be good. So the first time I brought my husband to a CAP picnic, which was several years ago. And so we were sitting there at that picnic, and he looked at me and he said, there's something different about CAP people. I said, I know, but what do you think it is? Because I know it. I know there is, but it's hard to describe. I said, so what do you think it is? He said, I don't know. He said, there's an openness. Like, I look at everybody's posture and their body language. He said, everybody's relaxed. Their arms are at their side. There's nobody, there's no jockeying for anything. There's no politicking going on. He said, it's just people enjoying being with each other. He said, it's like you all really like each other. And I said, we do really like each other. And he said, I think that's what it is. That's what I see. That's just so different. He said, I didn't have that in my job. And I'm like, yeah, we really like each other. I've tried to think about, who would I be? What would I be if I had not stayed at CAP? If I'd gone someplace else, done something else. The thing that CAP has, one of the many things that CAP has done for me is, matured me for sure. I can think back about what I was like when I was at Caprice. CAP really pours into people in their personal development, and so my personhood, I think, is different than it would have been perhaps if I had gone to another job that didn't care about me personally. I was just a means to an end of performing a job, But then getting to work in a Christian organization every day, and spending my life around people where we just get to talk casually and freely about spiritual things, and we get to pray in a moment's notice. If you're going through a thing and we need to pray, we're just going to pray, After all this time, I kind of take that for granted. But then when someone comes to CAP and starts to work and talks about how unique and different that is, I think, oh yeah, it is. And I need to not forget that, because it's so part of my life now that I forget sometimes that not everyone has that opportunity. For the last 20 years, I've not worked in human services. I've worked in administration. And so the people that I serve are our staff, our employees and volunteers. But the way that I feel like we in admin get to really share our faith is when there's a problem, when there's a situation you're facing. Yes, we have policies and we have procedures and we have guidelines, but then we're going to pray about it. I'm going to tell you all of those things, but then we're not going to end this conversation without praying about that, because a lot of it is we just need the Lord's wisdom and direction about how to handle this thing, and I love that we get to do that. One of the participants at Caprice was a woman whose name is Jane. And so then I would say she was probably in her 20s, she's probably close to my age, maybe a little younger. But anyway, she was pretty much nonverbal, but she was her body language. So she did all of her communicating with her body language because she was nonverbal. So one of the visits that Father Biding came, we'd set up a big table, and all of the staff and all the participants were around that table, and Father Biding was at the head of the table. And we didn't assign seats. Everybody just came in and got a seat. And so Jane ended up sitting next to Father Biding. Well, Father Biding would get to telling stories, and he would go on and on and on and go really long, And so he had been talking for probably, 15 or 20 minutes without really a break. And Jane was sitting beside him, and she went, oh. Of course, everybody started laughing. And Father Biding looked at her and said, it's time for me to wrap this up, isn't it? I got so tickled by that. And so anyway, we have church camp, at our church recently, and I looked across that camp and I'm like, that woman looks familiar to me. And so I went over and talked with their family, and sure enough, that was Jane. I hadn't seen her in 30 years. One of the things that we did in that program, I told you we did lots of activities, and one of the things we did was a thing called futures planning. And we would go into the home, and we had a process that we worked through that really walked those families. And it was not just the parents, but it was siblings, any extended family that had any kind of connection to this family member with a disability. We invited them all into the room, and we walked them through questions that led them to what are your hopes and plans for the future? Because what we realized were a lot of parents assumed that their children were going to take care of this sibling of theirs, or they just assumed it was all going to work out. They didn't really have a plan, And that was such a great experience, because we got to help families really make solid plans and really walk through thinking about that and getting out what each of them their hopes and dreams and expectations on the table, so they could make really informed, plans. And that was a valuable service. And I can think back to several of those participants that when we went into that, I felt kind of hopeless for them because it seemed like they had a really small circle, and I didn't know what the plan was going to be. And it unfolded, something unfolded, and it was really interesting to watch. But there was one woman that had a son, and because of the son's severity of his disabilities, she and her husband had not been able to maintain their marriage, and he was out of the picture. It was just her and this son, and we walked through the activity and the things, and we just couldn't get anywhere with her. It was the first one that we'd really done that I just felt like we didn't get where we needed to go. And so we wrapped it up for that day and we left, and I went home that evening just praying about it. And I'm like, I don't know where we go from here because nothing's unfolding. Normally it just kind of unfolded. Nothing unfolded. And I woke up the next morning. We were going to go back the next day. And it was just like I heard the Lord say, she doesn't have hopes for him and plans because she doesn't have hopes for herself. You've got to start with her. And I'm like, that's it. And she was just so hopeless about herself. She couldn't dream dreams for him. She couldn't dream dreams for herself. And so we went back the next day and we said, let's not focus on your son right now. Let's focus on you. What are your hopes and dreams? And it was like this world opened up, that she just had never thought about what she would like to do with her life and once we could get her to think about that, then we were able to get her to think about what does she want life for him to look like. It was just a really cool experience. I loved that we got to do those kinds of things because those were meaningful for families, And when I look back and I'm like, okay, it's my time to walk out the door of CAP, those are going to be the things I'm going to say, I did some good stuff there. I'm going to feel like I contributed my little piece of the CAP puzzle. I contributed to some good things. I ran out of gas one day. I didn't run out of gas. I was going to run out of gas leaving here, and I was already started back towards Somerset, and there was this little country gas station on 461. So I went in there, pulled in there to get gas, and got out to pump it, and you had to go in to pay. Well, when I went in to pay, they didn't accept credit cards. They only took cash. And I'm like, I don't have any cash, and I'm not going to make it home. And I had on my cap, one of my CAP logo things, and it was the owner, because it was a little country gas station. And he said, you work for the Christian Appalachian Project? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, I love CAP. He said, CAP helped work on my parents' home when I was a kid. And he said, they put a roof on our home. And I remember that as a kid thinking, what kind of people comes and does this stuff for people? And he said, do you have a check? And I said, I do have a check. And he said, write me a check and we'll be good. I'm like, okay, thank you. But, I've had so many of those kinds of interactions with people that saw the CAP logo on my shirt and told me a story about how CAP impacted their family in some way. It excites me when I see and hear new employees being excited about CAP, and loving CAP. And I got to talk to a fairly new employee recently. I actually took one of our bereavement crosses to him, and in talking with him, he said, I just never knew places like CAP existed. I just didn't know that you could work for a place like CAP. I love hearing those stories because I'm like, okay, so I'm not going to be around the next 60 years at CAP, but these people are, and their love and enthusiasm and their recognition that CAP is different, and they want to be part of that, and they're going to be part of making CAP continue to be different. That excites me.